Yeah, I think thanks to everybody for coming. I think some of you were in the yearly review, so some of these slides are gonna highly overlap with what we went over there. But I think we'll go through them pretty quickly and maybe leave the rest for an open discussion. So yeah, with that in mind, we'll go to the next slide. So most of you that are here came in from the other meeting, so you're familiar with OpenImageIO, but it's a tool set for reading, writing, and manipulating images. It's highly used in VFX and animation. It has a very robust API for dealing with many image types under the same API. So there's a good abstraction layer. And this is all probably not news to you guys, so we can move to the next slide. This is just an overview of the different components. So there are command line tools that many of us use on a daily basis, like OpenImageIO tool and MakeTX. There are API functions like the image buff and image buff algo for reading images, manipulating them. There are Python bindings. There are lower level components like the texture system that are in the image cache that are used inside renderers. And all of it wraps a variety of image types with a common API to use that kind of sort of abstracts the format from you. And yeah, there are very, very comfortable to use Python bindings that allow you to author it all either in C++ or in Python. Let's move to the next slide. So a little bit about the history of the project. Founded by Larry in 2008. We joined the ASWF last year. We have, as this meeting kind of overlaps with our TSC meeting, our Technical Steering Committee. So there are members from Sony, like myself and Larry, members from Weta, from Blender, from a variety of different studios. We use other, we are part of the Academy Software Foundation, and we use other projects that are also part of the Academy Software Foundation, like OpenEXR, OpenColor.io. All of those are used inside OpenImageIO. OpenImageIO is embedded in many DCCs, Katana, Houdini, Blender, Arnold, and it's most likely used in every studio across the world because we all need to manipulate images in one way or another. Let's go to the next slide. These are some of the more recent movies where it's been used on, but as we said, if you're watching a movie today, OpenImageIO probably played a part in the movie. It has some VFX, it probably played some part in the movie that you're watching. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so this year kind of very recently ended the first year with the Academy Software Foundation. So these are just some of the highlights of the year, many different contributors, many different contributions. One of the big themes of the year was the license change to Apache 2. And at least by lines of code, we're 99.86% there, so fairly close. There was a big 2.5 release that had a lot of improvements that had to do with color management. There's a new parallel frames features that allow you to operate in parallel on frame ranges. We're coming on next year's Dev Days, but last year's Dev Days had 8 contributions, and we'll see in the next slide how the contributions kind of shook out. And we're also, as far as security, we are 100% passing the OpenSSF requirements for passing, but less so for the silver and gold, which are more stringent. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, this is just kind of a map of contributors. This last year, you can see who was a first-time contributor this year is denoted in like a kind of a reddish asterisk, and the few dev day contributors are also, some of them are first-time contributors, are also there. So there was a healthy amount of contributors. I think Larry will discuss later about the type of contributions and the type of contributors that are attracted to the project. But as far as like just looking at it as a top level view, there was a good amount of engagement at different levels of contributions, specifically from first-time people, which is really nice to see. We'll move to the next slide. Yeah, I think I'll hand it to you, Larry, now.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about what's coming next. So we are at the time of the year where we do our big annual release. Excuse me. So just in case anyone listening is not aware of our release schedule, what we try to do is a once a month patch release that has fixes and occasionally new minor features that don't break any of the APIs or ABIs, so they can be put in a backward compatible way that won't break anyone that expects the older API. We shoot for the first of the month every month for that. We almost never miss it, but we're pretty close. And then once a year in the early fall, we do a major release that is able to break link and ABI compatibility. So time is coming for that. And so that would be like a 2.4 to 2.5, kind of release is how we refer to it. But this time around, we are doing one of our maybe once every 5 or so years, ones where we bump the first version, and that allows us to not just break linkage and binary compatibility, but we can actually break the APIs from the point of view of the applications. Not usually in major ways, but usually things that have long since been marked as deprecated. We do some spring cleaning and remove them, and so that can cause you to need to go back to go back to your applications that use OpenImageIO, and you might have to touch up some of the function calls or something to, if you were using the older APIs and you hadn't been upgrading them along the way. Anyway, so that's coming up in the next couple of months. And so some big things that we've done for this in terms of things that are already there in the master branch, long since committed. We took the opportunity to bump a bunch of the toolchain and dependency minimums. Some of the ones that you should be particularly aware of is our new minimum C++ standard is C++ 17, which means that sort of old C++ 14 and earlier compatibility and use of GCC 6 will be gone. You have to use 9 or more. I hope that's not a burden for anyone. Also, we are dropping Python 2 support from the Python bindings. So Python 3.7 is the new minimum, and there are a variety of other major dependencies and minor dependencies whose versions we're bumping that should be less apparent. Like that's more of a OpenImageIO build thing. Most of that should not be apparent to users particularly. But one that is hot off the presses and maybe will be is we're bumping the minimum OpenColorIO to 2.2 and making it a required dependency. And so the most important implication of that is, we're going from having the color management in OpenImageIO being kind of highly variable for exactly what you get and what things are supported, depending on which OpenColorIO you built against, or if you even built against OpenColorIO. And we're now moving to like a fairly modern version being required and or built in. So I think for OpenImageIO users, it means you can expect a much more uniform and complete level of OCIO color management to always be there. And you won't have to be wondering like, who built the OpenImageIO I'm using, what OpenColorIO was there, I don't know which features I have. Hopefully that will be a thing of the past. We also managed to get rid of Boost as a dependency entirely. not that there was anything wrong with its code, but it was just a complication. Over the years, we had, in the pre-C++ 11 days, we used it very heavily to get important features, and we've been sort of switching away from the Boost components to standard C++ components as we phased in those new versions of C++ as they became available. And so we were down to almost nothing that we used from Boost, but it's a big dependency that's kind of a pain to build and makes compatibility problems. So getting rid of the last remnants of that just eases the sort of build and compatibility gauntlet that you have to go through. As I said, we are using the fact that this is a 3.0 release to deprecate and fully get rid of a lot of old API things that we'd said were deprecated for a long time, and in many cases had warned that they were deprecated if you tried to use them. But now we're finally going to get rid of them for real. So be aware that you might have a few compatibility bumps as you upgrade to 3.0. But we do have a document that sort of details what all of those things are and what alternatives you should switch to. So that should be fairly straightforward. We're not doing the kind of overhaul that makes you rethink, everything. It's more that there's some calls where like we're getting rid of some old versions and switching to new ones. It should be straightforward. In terms of file formats, we had some great contributions that add compatibility recently for JPEG XL and for RED camera. In the case of the RED camera, you need to already have the RED SDK somewhere. Like, we don't distribute that, it's not ours. But if it's present at the time you build, you should be able to get support for reading those files via OpenImageIO. Plus just a ridiculous number of smaller but solid improvements, fixes, new small features, whole year's worth. So there are a few things that we're still trying to squeeze in before the final 3.0 release. We don't know if we'll get these all in. So this is our aspiration list. We're going to try really hard, but can't guarantee it at this point. So there are people who are working on a first cut of Rust bindings for the OpenImageIO classes. We are hoping that will be ready, that they can synchronize with 3.0. We aspire to eventually have that all folded into our project, I think is the right way to handle it, so that they always stay synchronized from here on out. We also have some people who are volunteered to try to get Python wheels built. Again, that will also be incorporated into our project, so it will happen automatically every time that we do a release. And so the idea there is, particularly for the Python users, but maybe for everybody, that just doing a pip install should be enough to get you all the basics. So that's an easy kind of one line build and install for a lot of people who have craved a simple solution like that. There's still some more API modernizing that I would like to do, and on my goals there, the two things that I'm really trying to accomplish before we lock the APIs down again before the final 3.0 is I'm trying to root out all of the places that we do these unsafe API calls where we pass a raw pointer and a size, or sometimes a raw pointer and it's just implied that the two sides agree on how big a buffer it points to. And I'm trying to replace those with a span idiom where it's passing a bounded range of addresses that are safe, and then we can have all sorts of checks to make sure we aren't doing anything that can write outside of those. So I'm liking that idiom for the future of being a little bit more careful about what kind of bugs we're on the lookout for. And also, I'm not sure what happened to the fonts there, but like I said, we recently made the OpenColorIO be a required dependency, but we still have left to do kind of a big pass over our code base to kind of bring everything up to like the features that can be counted on with the new release, to do it uniformly over all the plugins. Like we sort of, the color management we do now has kind of grown by accretion bit by bit in different places, and sometimes it's not really consistent, but we would like to fix that, and also to upgrade all the names that we use to the current set of OpenColorIO built-in color space names, and the draft that the color interop forum is picking for these fairly standard names, so that we can have sort of the same nomenclature as these other projects. So we want OpenImageIO and OSL and Material X and USD and OpenColorIO to all sort of agree on the terminology for the basic set of color spaces that we all tend to use in the studios. So hopefully that will make things a lot easier for users of all those projects. So the schedule, again, this is aspirational. This is our goal, but we'll see if we can meet it exactly. We might run over a little. I would love to have a beta with a locked down API compatibility by or close to September 1st, with the goal of doing a tagged non-beta release by October 1st. That's my current goal. We'll see. It's kind of mostly a matter of, can we finish the things up on this list in time, with the highest priority probably going to the things that will make API compatibility changes, because once we end the beta, and hopefully by the time we start the beta, we don't want any more compatibility changes. We can add things as long as they don't break anything that's already there. So after the 3.0 release, a few highlights from the roadmap of things that we would like to do. I think there's continued work on the color management. I suspect we'll get some of the basics of kind of uniformizing those things in time for 3.0, but I bet you that there's more that we'll continue to do over time to enhance that. Metadata is another thing that we handle in sort of an ad hoc way. I would love for somebody to craft a principled strategy for how to clean that up and move forward with it, in kind of a more organized, consistent fashion. So I'd love to see that coming. We've done just a little bit of preliminary work on GPU support. So right now, we basically don't use GPU for anything other than the viewer, although we do currently detect it when it's built. Like we've got a little bit of infrastructure, but we're not using it for anything yet. The highest priority there, from my point of view, is that like a lot of people have been waiting a long time to have a CUDA and optics implementation of the texture system natively. A bunch of renderers would be happy to jump on this and use it, including mine. So that's high priority. I also think that there are ways to use GPU acceleration for image processing and other things. That is a little bit uncertain because how much mileage you can get out of GPU depends on your compute to IO ratio. And so like a lot of typical OpenImageIO workloads are read a few images in, do some usually not super hard computations on them, and then output something else to disk. So you could easily get in the situation where no matter how much you speed up the computational part of that with the GPU, you're still, you're very limited in your total speed up because you're so bounded by the IO. So I think we're going to have to look at that on kind of a case-by-case basis, but it's something that we should work on for sure and see how much mileage we can get out of it. And there are parts of our current code base where I think they've been stale for a while and could use anything ranging from kind of an update and a freshening to, in some cases, a major overhaul to set us up on a better path for the future. And in particular, areas I want to highlight are the DSLR RAW formats, our handling of movie files, and HEIC files. I think, yeah, in all of those cases, like what's there works, but it's been a little bit cobbled together and maintained by people who aren't experts in those particular areas. I think all could use a rethink in a lot of ways. So stepping back, looking at the project. So what's been working well over the last couple of years, and since we joined the foundation. So I think the project is used as extensively as ever and continuing to grow. I think, pretty much every major VFX and animation studio uses it extensively. It's embedded in a ton of other open source projects, commercial products, studio pipelines, renderers, all over the place. So in terms of like the code base being solid and being heavily used, I think we're firing on all cylinders there. As Danny showed earlier, just in terms of like the number of people who make contributions and the rate of getting new people coming and making contributions, I think we have a really good story to tell there, even compared to some of the other projects. Like it's a vibrant project with new people coming along all the time and making solid contributions. And also, since we joined the foundation, having these, every second week TSC Zoom meetings really has helped a lot, pushing the project forward, getting other people's eyes and ears and hands on it, and having sort of more active steering from a lot of the major stakeholders. So that all really I could not be happier about. I think a place that we could use some work, and this is not unique to this project, although we have lots of these small contributions where people contribute a specific fix or a particular feature, sometimes a big feature that they need. Very often these are in the form of someone coming to the project, doing a specific thing that they need, and then that's the last thing they do until the next thing that they need. And so that is a different kind of participation and contribution than people who are sort of consistently spending a certain percentage of their time on the project. And the reason that that's important is not just the total amount of labor, but like I have a belief that if you're not kind of tinkering on a project on a regular enough basis, like it doesn't necessarily have to be daily, but like you're in it all the time and you're kind of immersed in it. I think that's when you have more global insights of like, where does this need to be in a few years? What are the overhauls that should be done? I think that when you're narrowly focused on, I need to add feature X or fix bug Y, you don't always take in the big picture. And so you may know a bunch about the code base, but you're not thinking like, where should the APIs be in the future in order to do this other big thing that we haven't thought of yet. And so when I think about like what is our resourcing level compared to like where I think we could be in terms of, rapid advancement of the project and hitting all of our roadmap goals and so on. Like I'm going to estimate in an unscientific way that maybe we're at 30 to 50%. So like, I think we're moving at most half speed compared to what we could be doing if we had, kind of all the resources we wanted. So I gave a talk about this topic, not in any way OpenImageIO specific, but just sort of looking at all the ASWF projects last week, week before at SIGGRAPH for the ASWF open source days. And it's up on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com and search for ASWF Open Source Days 2024. You'll see all the talks. There are lots of really good ones, but relevant to this. Look at that one. Also look at the contribution matrix.aswf.io to see some of the raw data I took that from, and you'll kind of get a feel of what's there. So this is my way of saying this looks like a project that's got everything it needs, but it really doesn't. None of them do. And so if you're from an organization that depends on these projects, I do encourage you to think about what resources you can help give back. And I don't think that mostly it's about assigning people kind of full time. Like So I've got a list here of like things that could easily be accomplished by each of them being someone who spends, 10 or 20% of their time on it and can make really good progress. And it could even be on some of these in particular and then, go away for a while. But like there's this sort of ongoing daily, grind of like answering the issues, figuring out what's a real bug, fixing those things, keeping up with, the dependencies as they issue new releases, making sure we can build properly against them and update our CI to test against them and so on. Sometimes GitHub or the dependencies make changes that just randomly break our CI. And so we go from things passing to stuff being broken in the CI runs, even though we've made no changes on our side. So there's sort of a constant, like low level upkeep that needs to go on to keep that working. Sometimes people report security problems that need to be jumped on. Like I said, we have a monthly release that, takes some work, every month, just the logistics of doing it. None of that stuff is really, rocket science, but every little bit helps and does take some work. I personally, and most of the other people on the TSC work in studios that are primarily or solely Linux. And so again, not just on this project, but on the other ASWF projects as well. I think we have a chronic shortage of people who are really comfortable doing Windows development and know what the experience of, building and using and developing is like for other Windows users. And so I think sometimes we operate a lot less efficiently than we could in terms of kind of helping that part of our constituency, not by willful neglect, but just because it's out of our experience level. So anybody who is more comfortable or works in Windows, all day, who can pitch in with some of that, like even just like answer questions on the Slack or the mail list, or like you see an issue that looks Windows related and the answer, jump on it. But even things like that, like really help both the burden on the senior developers, as well as just improving our kind of responsiveness to the users who need help in those areas. And sometimes I look at them and I just like, I don't know what to tell them. And I know that's true of a bunch of the other regulars also. It's just outside of our experience level. Some of the bigger projects that are mostly short-term for a while, but then probably a very low level of ongoing work would be like the metadata thing I mentioned, the color management work, the overhauls of the raw, movie, and HEIC, each of which are independent. Like you don't have to tackle all of those. And then like the biggest like long-term big work project that I had on that list is the GPU part. And most of the other things are really like short-term. Like you could make a big dent in it fast. So there's a phrase we have in this project, mackerel, and that's our code word for here's a problem that you don't have to be me to fix. You don't have to be any of the senior people, and maybe it might even be like the first thing that you did. But this is an excellent chance for somebody to step forward and try and help out with it. And you learn a lot in the process. And so, the phrase, if you give someone a fish, you feed them for a day, but if you teach them to fish, you feed them for a lifetime. And so, we're all in organizations that use these packages. And I think it's a risky proposition for your organization to be in a position where some software you depend on, you don't have anyone there would be comfortable jumping in and fixing a bug that you need fixed right away, or adding a feature that would benefit for you. So I think it's worth the investment to make sure everybody's got someone there who's not, who feels empowered to go in and fix things in these open source projects. And so I'm not even talking about like adding a ton of people who are working full-time on this. I don't work full-time on this. But if 5 or 6 of the companies that use this really heavily, each just have a person spend like 1 day a week, kind of level of ongoing commitment, like that alone would double or triple the development velocity of the project overall. We would just get so much done, and it doesn't require like a large staff or anything. It's just a little bit more consistent attention. So to that end, let me put in one more advertisement for the ASWF Dev Days. So it is scheduled for September 26th and 27th, 2024. You can find out all the information on devdays.aswf.io. And so the idea here is it's a little kind of hackathon-ish event where in a 48-hour window to accommodate the fact that people are all over the world and have different, conveniences for when they can schedule things exactly. We're asking for people who want to try to do a one-day task in a project that they haven't participated in before, or maybe they've never participated in any open source project before. So it's specifically for new people. That doesn't necessarily mean they're new to programming, but it just might mean they're new to the project or new to open source. And last year, like some of the great ones were like fairly experienced developers at different studios, but like they'd never dipped their toes in the open source, waters before. And so those were great. So from the point of the projects, we try to have a bunch of tasks that we think a relatively new to the project person can do in a day, marked with a good first issue tag. And during that 48 hours, we're going to try to be especially on the ball on all the communication channels to make sure that participants who run into any trouble or have questions, we're right there to help them out. This is coming up fast. So if you were interested in participating, go to that page, get yourself signed up. If you work for a company, make sure you have the right permissions to do it and so on. So the companies, if they haven't participated in the project before, they might need some lead time to like get the CLAs signed or get clearances or things, things like that, do it all above board. But this is an excuse to get these things out of the way. Like you're picking, this tiny little harmless, very non-threatening one-day task, getting all the paperwork done. And then after that, if something bigger comes along, like you've got the rails greased to be able to participate more in the project or get the thing fixed your company needs without running into bureaucratic castles because you've taken care of them at a time when the stakes were kind of low. And so again, my pitch to the company is like, there's a lot of benefit from having another person, or maybe even just the first person, who feels like they've done this once before, they're comfortable going into a project and fixing something that your company needs to have fixed right away. That's a very powerful thing to be able to control your own destiny for tools that you're very dependent on. So that's the end of my prepared section. So for the rest of the time, we can have any discussion that people want to have. Not limited to this, but like this is certainly a chance to express directions you want the project to go, features that you want, shortcomings you perceive, things that you wish it had, as well as if you're one of those people saying like, oh, I didn't know they needed help, how can I do? This is also a good time to ask. Although I think we've told you a few of the ideas, but we're certainly willing to discuss like how it is that other people can contribute. And it's not, like I said, it's not just the code. Like you don't particularly need to be like an expert coder to do things like help with some of the releases or, improve the docs or, triage issues or answer, some build questions for people. Like a lot of very important tasks can be done by people who may not think that they're a senior developer somewhere, and that's fine. So I'll open up to questions or discussion at this point. Don't be shy. Yes, Mark, go ahead.
Can I just ask what kind of changes and things you might be envisaging hitting the raw format plugin or what a rewrite might involve?
Yeah, I mean, I'm uh, I think that is largely why we want someone to, kind of take some ownership of that. Like I can just barely keep it working and maybe fix a bug, but I feel like I'm just not immersed enough in using raw or knowing about the underlying libraw library to feel like I'm fluent in it. So I can kind of putter around and fix stuff as necessary sometimes, but I feel like it's at the edge of what I keep in the cache in my head in terms of like libraw knowledge. I know Anton has been in there recently, which I'm very thankful for. Like, I don't know. Like, I think it needs people who know more about it to do it, to come up with what that list is of what needs to be accomplished in an overhaul. I mean, I think for me, one of the top of mind things is I feel like our handling of the metadata is probably not as good as it could be. Like a number of people have said, hey, the metadata that OpenImageIO retrieves is not as extensive as what EXIF tool or whatever their other thing of choice says. So like I don't know to what extent. Oh, and libraw has a property that is a mixed bag, which is like they change from one major to release to the next. They change their APIs and their structures and stuff a lot in terms of like what gets extracted in the metadata and stuck in what parts. So like I don't even know like the boundaries of which things is libraw itself not retrieving. How much of that is their fault and how much is just can't be helped. Or are there things that libraw could be giving us, but that we're not like using the APIs or pulling the things out of the right structures, or like we're not getting it from libraw as thoroughly as we could be? Or I don't know exactly where the problems lay, but like that's sort of the metadata stuff is one part of it. And maybe some of what we would ideally want is not the libraw itself does not consider like in their mission statement, and maybe we need to think about, I don't know how else, is there anything we can do on our end to mitigate some of that? I don't know. But that's one area. Or like if you look at like the last couple of PRs from Anton, you can see like there were places where there are things that people who are interested in the DSLR raw data might want to extract stuff where we didn't provide it. Two examples is like he just added a few new sort of control hints that we allow us to pass other additional hints down to libraw to control its decoding, just like stuff libraw could already do, but we didn't expose it because I didn't know. And also like I don't think it's been merged yet, but he's in the middle of writing image buff algo function that will take the non-debared data, like the black and white stuff, and apply our own algorithms to turn it into the proper color image, and presumably to bootstrap his way to using kind of better color management matrices in there or something. So like I think there's lots of directions to take it. It just requires someone who's like more of a going to be a user of it to scratch their, like a lot of the important features are there because they scratch somebody's itch. And like I'm kind of a believer in the best implementation of a feature in OpenImageIO or anywhere else is probably going to be done by someone who imagines themselves as the consumer of that feature, because then they're gonna make sure it gives them what they need. Whereas if you ask me, like, give us some more libraw stuff, I don't use it every day, so I can only guess at what the people who use it every day might want, and that will mean I'm probably missing the boat half the time. So like, and the same thing is true with like the movie files that we use FFmpeg for that. But again, like it sort of basically works. I know it's got, I think, some performance issue for like extracting frames from long films and stuff. So, but I don't quite know the boundaries of it because again, it's just not a feature I use every day. So I can verify that it works, but But I don't know what's missing. But someone who cares about that a lot should be the one who's kind of driving what the direction of the features related to that should be in the future. I mean, there's a lot of use cases. Like there are, I think, there are a lot of facets to this package and different sort of user constituencies. Like there's one, group of users who, like, the only parts of OpenImageIO they use are the parts you would want to call from within a high-end renderer, and they never see anything else and they don't care, right? And then there's another group of users that they're all like completely about like the OpenImageIO tool, command line kung fu, because they're writing the shell scripts that like do the ingests and do format conversions and whatever else their studio needs, but they never see any of the other aspects. Like there's a bunch of different constituencies, and we don't always have kind of representation from all of them in terms of like what they need to satisfy everything they want. I think even in cases where they're getting stuff that they want, I bet you they have a better imagination than some of us do about where to go next to serve that part of the constituency. So that's part of why I want just kind of more general stakeholder involvement, because I think it can be more things to more people than I and we on this call have the imagination for sometimes.
Thanks.
Danny, did you have any other comments or things to add or perspectives?
No, not really. I like what you said about the OpenImageIO tool, Shell Ninjas. It's definitely historically has been my part of the pipeline, and I think I may have a contributor from inside Sony who might join us in the next few meetings that very well represents that part as well. So hopefully, I think that perspective will be well represented.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. Cool. Well, if nobody has anything else, I think we can call it a day.
Yeah, generally, I think I wanted him to do the dev days. So we might discuss it in the next, maybe, since this is kind of virtual town hall plus TAC, but maybe in the next TAC we can discuss a little bit how to onboard people in the dev days, because I was gonna suggest that some.
Yeah, and that gives me an excuse to add for anyone who's on the call, but also anyone listening to the recording later. So so we have a mail list, we have a Slack channel, we have every second week, Zoom calls for the steering committee. All of these things are open to everyone. You can get to them all through the ASWF.io website. Additionally, we have some URLs just for this, like the meeting calendar is on calendar.openimageio.org. And yeah, and you just plug yourself into any of those communication channels. There aren't any that are closed off to just the insiders. It's all done out in the open the whole time. If you want to see how the sausage is made, anybody can come to the TSC meetings and participate, right? Like we're always open to people coming who have input. All right, going once, going twice. Great. Thank you all for joining. Thanks to later watchers of the video, and see you at the next meeting.